I am Olga Schutter. I'm the Director of Facades and Local Law, and I'm joined by my colleague, Claudia Misi, who is the Assistant Chief Plan Examiner.
The learning objectives for this presentation are as follows. We will review the history of FISP, New York City's Facade Inspection and Safety Program. We will review building maintenance and facade safety or FISP provisions for buildings over 6 stories in the New York City Building Code and in the applicable rules of the City of New York. We will review the requirements of FISP reports as outlined in 1 RCNY 10304, which we call the Façade rule. And we'll see how these help protect the public and mitigate risk from unsafe facade conditions. And lastly, we will review the process of critical examination of building facades and discuss how to identify signs of facade deterioration and unsafe conditions before catastrophic failure occurs. As you probably already know, we like to use a lot of acronyms at the DOB. FISP stands for Facade Inspections and Safety Program. In a nutshell, that's what we do. Our job is to make sure dangerous and potentially dangerous conditions are identified and addressed before catastrophic failure happens. The FISP and Local Law Unit is made up of a team of specialized plan examiners, all are registered architects or professional engineers with significant facade experience, inspectors who undergo a comprehensive training program in facade inspections, and administrative staff. Together, we oversee all buildings over 6 stories in the city. What do we mean by over 6 stories? 6 stories in basement on any elevation, over 6 stories on any elevation, regardless of what it says in the certificate of occupancy. Currently, there are 16,000 buildings in the FISP universe. Each year that grows. The Facades unit is part of the DOB's enforcement arm and falls under the umbrella of the DOB's investigative engineering services, along with the forensic engineering unit, or FEU, the concrete enforcement unit, CEU, and the retaining wall unit. Other initiatives include structurally compromised buildings, cooling towers, and sprinklers. Now, what is a facade ordinance? A facade ordinance, the purpose of a facade ordinance or any mandatory periodic facade inspection program is to protect the public from dangerous facade conditions. A facade ordinance furthers public safety by requiring certain buildings be periodically inspected to access the status of their exterior wall and appurtenances in order to identify dangerous conditions and prevent dangerous conditions from developing before failure occurs. Facade ordinances establish, firstly, which buildings are subject to inspection and compliance filing. It might be those over a certain height. It might be those over a certain number of stories. Facade ordinances also establish who is allowed to inspect them, what qualifications do they need. They will also tell you when or how often these inspections and reporting must occur. And last but not least, facade ordinances will tell you how. They establish the procedures for inspection, evaluation, and reporting requirements. Now, New York City is a pioneer when it comes to facade inspections. We have the longest continually running facade ordinance in North America. There are other cities that followed and enacted their own mandatory periodic facade inspections programs, often in the aftermath of a fatality. There's Columbus, Ohio in 1985, Boston in 1995, Chicago in 96, even Singapore. Before enacting their own periodic facade inspection program in 2020, a team from Singapore's Building Construction Authority was sent to a facades unit for several months to shadow our inspectors and plan examiners and learn about our program. You can see from the chart that the interval for inspections is usually 5 years minimum, but there are a few exceptions. In Cincinnati, for example, the frequency for inspections depends on the type of construction, while in Milwaukee, it's based on building age. Jurisdictions also differ in how they determine which buildings are subject to mandatory inspections in compliance reporting. Most base it on the height of the building or the number of stories, or both. Some exceptions are Pittsburgh, requiring periodic facade inspections for all buildings, and Columbus, Ohio, where eligibility is based on age and proximity to the public right-of-way. In terms of who is allowed to inspect and file facade compliance reports, most jurisdictions require the registered architect or professional engineer. Again, there are some exceptions. Some allow only a structural engineer. Others, such as Detroit, also allow special inspectors and contractors to file. While in New York, not only do you need to be a registered design professional, you need additional experience. This is outlined in one RCNY 10107. And you must be qualified by the department to become a qualified exterior wall inspector, or QE. Here's another frequently used acronym. Now, what are the origins of FISP? Well, in the spring of 1979, Grace Gold, a Barnard College freshman, was walking with a friend when a piece of terracotta fell from 601 West 115th Street in Manhattan, fatally striking her on the head. As a result, in February 21, 1980, Mayor Ed Koch approved Local Law 10 of 1980, which amended the New York City Administrative Code, adding section C26-105.3, requiring periodic inspection of exterior walls and appurtenances of buildings greater than 6 stories every 5 years. The law required a report of inspection to be prepared, signed, and sealed by a licensed architect or engineer, which was to be submitted to the Commissioner of Buildings. Thus, New York City established what would become the longest continually running facade ordinance program in the country. Over the next 40-some years, both the law and the rule would undergo multiple revisions, the most significant of which were often in response to fatal incidents. The DOB staffing, administration, and oversight of this population of buildings would evolve dramatically over time as well. Let's go over the main provisions of Local Law 10 of 1980. Firstly, buildings over 6 stories were subject to periodic inspection every 5 years. Inspection had to be conducted and the report prepared by or under the supervision of a registered design professional, that is, a registered architect or professional engineer. It had to be submitted to the department, not just kept in the professional's archives. It had to be submitted in writing and under the professional seal. The facades inspector was to design an inspection program that permit complete inspection of same in accordance with the nature of the building's materials and known maintenance history. Defects observed were to be classified as unsafe or precautionary. Architect or engineer was required to make recommendations for repair and maintenance. Repairs of unsafe conditions had to start immediately, while repairs were not required for precautionary conditions. Once repairs of unsafe conditions were completed, the design professional was to notify the Department of Buildings in writing. Now, there were some limitations to this first rule, Local Law 10 of 1980. First of all, the engineer or architect in charge of the inspection was not required to be physically present at the location where the examination was made. A close-up inspection was not required. This was also left up to the discretion of the professional. An amended report was not required once the unsafe conditions had been repaired. The professional engineer or architect simply had to submit a statement to the borough office confirming the completion of repairs. Facades over 25 feet or more from the street line were exempt from inspection. And also, mapping of defects was not specifically required. Much of this will change over subsequent revisions, as we will see. This slide shows a sort of rough timeline of the development of the FISP unit, as well as revisions to the facades rule. Often tragedies led to revisions to the rule, or they led to expansion of our enforcement capabilities. As we already discussed, Grace Gold's death led to the implementation of the Local Law 10 of 1980. Then in 1997, a brick wall collapse, we'll discuss that in a minute, led to Local Law 11 of 1998. The Facades and Local Law unit as its own unit, developed in 2000. The year our first plan examiner was hired, that's Mr. Stelter. Then some of you may remember a tragic accident in 2015 where toddler Greta Green was killed by a piece of terracotta that fell off a building facade. After investigating the accident, the Department of Investigations made some recommendations including for an automated database to track the history of each building's compliance. That facade compliance filings were moved from paper to DOB Now Safety. The facades unit was the first unit to be on DOB Now. And more recently, in 2019, Erica Tishman's untimely death led to the doubling of our inspectorial staff and the passage of some major revisions to RCNY 10304 in 2020. One of the major revisions happened in 1986 when the requirement for a detailed amended report was introduced. So now you had to file an amended report after unsafe conditions were repaired, telling us some details on how the conditions were repaired. This revision also established a 30-day time frame for completion of repairs. Later, this will be revised to 90 days, but before there was no specified time frame. This revision also established the requirement to file extensions for work that could not be completed within that time frame. Now, I promised you we would go over this. Here's 540 Madison Avenue, Manhattan. All right, as you can see, a large swath of bricks fell from that wall. Now that wall was more than 25 feet from the street line. So it had not been subject to the inspection and reporting requirements of Local Law 10. As a result, Local Law 10 of 1980, or Section 26-105.3 of the Administrative Code, was removed, and Section 27-129, or Local Law 10 of 1998, was added. Some of the major changes introduced were walls more than 25 feet from the street line are no longer exempt from inspection. A physical examination from a scaffold or other platform is now required for a representative sample of the exterior wall. This version also introduced the classifications we use today: safe, unsafe, and safe for with a repair and maintenance program, or SWARM. Then came the 2008 building code. As most of you know, 2008 saw the first major overhaul to New York City's building code. Right, up until this point, we had been using the 1968 code. At this time, the facade inspection requirement was incorporated into Article 302 of the accompanying administrative code. Later, in January of 2011, one RCNY 103-04 was enacted. This is the facade rule we still use today, with a few revisions. And finally, we come to the 2020 revisions. We will discuss that in a little more detail later. But these are some of the major changes. The close-up inspection requirements were increased. Now physical examinations or close-up inspections are required at intervals no greater than 60 feet for all walls facing a public right-of-way. Probes are now required for cavity walls, brick cavity walls, at every odd-numbered cycle. The mapping of unsafe and swarm conditions is now required. And the other innovation introduced is that where there are unsafe conditions, the qualified exterior wall inspector, or QE, must now indicate the type and location of the public protection to be provided. Now let's look at what is in the New York City Construction Code, what provisions are in the New York City Construction Codes for facades or buildings over 6 stories. So here's Chapter 3 of the Administrative Code. Chapter 3 opens by establishing a number of important provisions in a very short paragraph. And I've highlighted the most relevant phrases. Firstly, it establishes the owner's responsibility to maintain all buildings in a safe and code compliant condition. Note that this is not just buildings over 6 stories, this is all buildings. Next, it states that code compliance means compliance with the codes and regulations that were in effect at the time the building was constructed. It also, and very importantly, establishes the obligation of persons involved in building maintenance to report in writing of any dangerous or unsafe conditions to the department. And finally, it establishes that the owner is to comply with the requirements of this chapter, which takes you to Article 302, which begins to discuss provisions for buildings over 6 stories. So that's what we just discussed. Now, the very next paragraph is about facades of buildings over 6 stories. As always, the top paragraph of each article in code tells you of its scope. Right? In this case, it tells you which buildings are subject to periodic facade inspection and compliance reports, those greater than 6 stories. The inspection requirements call for critical examination. Critical examination is not a scope of repairs document. It's an assessment of the conditions encountered. This paragraph also talks about the 5-year cycles and the staggered inspection cycles, A, B, or C, depending on the block number. It also says that the inspection must be done by a registered design professional with appropriate qualifications as prescribed by the department. These requirements, again, are outlined in 1 RCNY 10107. And it makes reference to a rule promulgated by the commissioner And this is one RCNY 10304, our facade rule. That's what we just discussed. Now going on with Article 302. In Article 302, the repair of unsafe conditions shall begin immediately. These repairs shall be completed within 90 days, or you must file for an extension for up to 90 days. If repairs are still not completed, you must file for additional extensions up to 90 days. This process of filing extensions allows the facades unit to, one, ensure public protection is still in place, and follow up on the progress of repairs. Now, 302.6 talks about swarm conditions. Swarm conditions may not be carried over from the previous cycle. They must be repaired. Any swarm conditions repeated from the previous cycle must be filed as unsafe. That's what we just talked about. Some of the basics of the rule. So this is the definition of the possible classifications. Right? A safe condition is a condition that does not require repair and maintenance, and that will not become unsafe during the next 5 years. Now, a swarm condition, or safe with a repair and maintenance program, is a condition that requires repairs or maintenance during the last 5 years, but not within less than 1 year. Why not less than 1 year? Because a condition requiring repair within less than 1 year is defined as an unsafe condition. For swarm conditions, typically public protection is not required until repairs begin. Right? These repairs may or may not require a permit, depending on scope. An unsafe condition is a condition that requires repair within 1 year. Right? It is also any condition that was reported as swarm in the previous cycle that didn't get repaired. Typically, for unsafe conditions, public protection is required immediately and must remain in place until an amended report is accepted by the department. Continuing with report requirements outlined in the rule. 3 typical conditions must be shown for safe buildings. Photos of all elevations must be included in the report. You must provide a plot plan showing the location of all close-up inspections. All unsafe and swarm conditions must be mapped. And the inspections and report must be done under the direct supervision of a Kiwi and reviewed review of the previous reports is required. Probes are required for cavity wall construction, starting with the 9th cycle and every odd cycle thereafter. And close-up inspections and scaffold drops are required every 60 feet along the public right-of-way.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm going to highlight the changes in the facade rule that went into effect last February. In fact, all the revisions were introduced to further public safety. Basically, we raised the bar on minimum standards. One of the biggest changes, of course, was the number of close-up inspections required on a particular building. So instead of the one drop minimum, now the inspections must be in every 60 feet on facades facing public right-of-way. What is public right-of-way, right? We have frequently asked. It is a street, avenue, a sidewalk, a roadway, or any other public place or public way. The elevation of a facade is part of the public right-of-way if any member of the public can freely walk up to the facade of the building, even if that facade is on private property. So the way to calculate the number of drops required is to add up the linear footage of facades in public right-of-ways, divide by 60 and round up. Now note that the drops must be evenly distributed to the extent possible along the various elevations facing public right-of-way. Currently, drone inspections do not eliminate close-up inspections done by a human, but we established a working group with industry to discuss the use of technology. Cavity wall construction is one of our most common failures, and we are addressing the issue with this rule change. Cavity wall construction originated after World War II, and it includes a brick exterior with an air gap and a backup block or brick wall where the two walls are tied together with metal ties. So starting cycle 9, probes are required at every drop of a cavity wall building to verify the presence, condition, and spacing of the wall ties. There are a few exceptions though. QEs can submit special inspection reports for a new building, for example, or field reports from a recent building repair campaign, or they can also use alternate methods to get the required information on the ties. Frequently asked questions: do probes need a permit? Per 1 RCNY 101-14, most probes are considered minor work and do not require a permit, therefore would not trigger the need for a site safety plan or a site safety manager or coordinator for the probe work. These are the details we want to see in the report to reinforce that we actually get real information. Photos of probe location and size, cross-section of the wall, spacing of the ties, close-up of the tie, and any other condition that would indicate the soundness of the wall ties and the wall itself. Another big change is mapping. What do we mean by mapping and why do we need this? We need to know where conditions are located on the facades. It is important for us because public protection depends on it. It also gives us a baseline of conditions for future amended filings. It helps us track the repairs. Inspection findings could be documented either on elevation drawings, marked up elevation photos, or a combination of both, as long as they provide a clear representation of the locations of all the facade conditions. To prevent owners from constantly filing their buildings unsafe cycle after cycle, there is a new requirement to provide an unsafe date in the report. So we understand that most of the repair campaigns for facades cannot be completed within 90 days, right? Which is the requirement in the facade rule, that unsafe condition must be corrected in 90 days. due to the size and complexity of these campaigns. Requirement to file the time extensions every 90 days using the FISP1 and FISP2 forms has not changed. So this allows us to monitor that the work is complete before the next filing cycle. Note that extension requests will not be granted past the unsafe date specified in the report. So if you see a condition you think needs to be repaired within 1 year, that condition is unsafe and must be corrected in 90 days. And facade repair must include the correction of underlying causes, not only cosmetic repair of the observed deterioration. Another change that is not specifically outlined here, but it's important, is that swarm conditions should not be repeated even if they are repaired. So this is to prevent the superficial repairs, right? We are looking for correcting the underlying conditions. So if a previously repaired condition needs to be repaired again within the same filing cycle, the assumption is that the repair performed wasn't the correct or adequate repair, and the condition is unsafe. Similarly, if the same swarm condition is noted as needing and having had completed repairs in 2 consecutive cycles, that condition also must be reported as unsafe. A big question that we always get: when can you take a sidewalk shut down? For safe and swarm reports, wherever your repairs are completed, as far as facade unit is considered, you can take the shutdown. If it is a site safety job, you will have to get their permission as well. Now, for buildings with unsafe status, public protection must remain until the owner's QE files an amended report, and that report is accepted by a unit in DOB safety, which point the status of the building will be changed to either safe or swarm. But until that time, the building has an unsafe status, and building protection, public protection, must remain in place. There is an option to use a partial shed removal request in DOB safety. And it may be used to remove public protection where a larger section of a building have completed work, let's say on one exposure, but other remaining work remains on other exposures. Our civil penalty schedule has changed, and the amounts basically quadrupled. The rules stay the same, so any building that does not file a report, files late, or fails to file time extensions will start accruing civil penalties, but at a much higher rate now. There is one new penalty added to the rule, which is for uncorrected swarm conditions carried over from previous cycle, turning into an unsafe condition. That is a one-time penalty of $2,000. There are a few exceptions for civil penalties, and the waiver request can be submitted, but only requests showing proof as per the rule will be accepted. The tenants of buildings should be aware of the status of their facades, right? Similar to elevator certificates. So condition certificates for facades can be printed from DOB safety, similar to printing a building permit. Important to know that whichever filing you select, regardless of the cycle, only the latest status from the most recent accepted FISP report will be reflected on that certificate. This is the last slide discussing the new rule. A dated photo of the inspector conducting close-up inspections while the inspection is in progress must be uploaded with the report. This is in an effort to prevent fraudulent filings with regards to who does the inspections and that they are actually being done. The process of critical examination. It is the QE's responsibility to design an inspection program that is based on the considerations of the type of construction of the building's envelope, age of the material components, the facade-specific exposure to environmental condition, and presence of special details and appurtenances. Consideration shall be given to the facade's history of maintenance and repairs as described in previous reports and submittals to the department. The QE's responsibility to review these reports and design the inspection program for the building. Most inspectors would go to the building to conduct a visual inspection from the ground and determine where and how they will do the required number of close-up inspections and if the probes are required. During close-up inspections, facade conditions need to be identified, documented, located, and classified. Sounding of materials should be done if necessary as well. A final visual inspection by the QE personally is also required within 60 days of filing the report in DOB Now Safety. What to do unsafe conditions when you uncover unsafe conditions. So in case the inspector uncovers unsafe conditions, they have to take the following steps. To contact the ownership to arrange for required public protection to be installed immediately. Call 311 or 911 immediately and file a complaint. Then file a FISP form, which is the notification of unsafe conditions in DOB Now Safety. These first 3 steps have to happen immediately, right after uncovering the unsafe condition. And after that, an unsafe report must be filed in DOB Now Safety and require time extensions if necessary, if more time than 90 days is required to repair the conditions. After the conditions are corrected, an amended report has to be filed in DOB Now Safety to change the status of the building from unsafe to swamp or safe. Important to note that building owners are also required to report unsafe conditions to the DOB. So it's not only the responsibility of the QE. Okay, so I already mentioned cavity walls as one of the big areas of facade failures. There are 2 more. So cavity walls is one, terracotta and glass are the 3 big areas for us. However, recently, in the past year, I would say we had a large number of EIFS failures, and I wanted to show a few examples today. So what is EIFS? It's an exterior insulation and finish system. It's an exterior cladding system that consists of insulation board attached either with adhesives or with mechanical fasteners or both to a substrate, and then finished with a reinforced base coat and a textured finish coat. It became very popular in the 70s. However, because of the lack of proper drainage membrane, it resulted in extensive problems. EIFS components are prone to water infiltration. When it occurs, water gets trapped between the components and causes deteriorations, ending in failures of EIFS panels. As a result, EIFS with drainage was introduced in the 90s. However, the original barrier system is still in use today. So what to look for? What are the signs of failures? Active water leaks, exposed reinforcing mesh, bulging, cracks in the finish coat at or near corners of penetrations. So this first building, you can see on the photos, an exposure to south elevation, approximately 6 by 10 wall section detached and fell from approximately the 35th floor to the terrace of the neighboring building below, damaging the roof pavers and the glass railing system. During the engineer's investigation, it was found that overall, the assembly as installed had multiple observed deficiencies, including inadequate frequency, placement, and embedment of anchors. Second building in Queens. This photo is from August of last year. Exposure to a southwestern facade, approximately 25 by 25 feet area of EIFS dislodged between the 3rd and the 6th floors and fell onto adjoining roof. You can see the adhesive on this close-up photo. Now, this photo shows the same building on exposure 4 that was taken in August of last year. You can see that the EIFS on this wall is still attached. Then here, it's a little bit brighter here. This photo was taken in March of this year, showing the same exposure where approximately 16 by 16 EIFS panel fell onto the adjacent 2-story property roof. At this point, engineers recommended that to fix the conditions, the cladding had to be removed and replaced on exposure 2. And on exposure 4, the cladding attachment to be reinforced by installing mechanical anchors. The 3rd building in Manhattan, exposure 3, east elevation, section of facade surface with approximately 20 feet by 60 feet high, about 5 stories high, right, delaminated and fell off the facade, damaging cars in a parking lot below and 2 storefronts on the opposite side of the street. So note a lot of damage in here, street closure, and a lot of property damage. And last example in Brooklyn, building exposure 2, side elevation, approximately 30 by 30 section of EIFS fell to the adjacent building's backyard and roof. In this case, the inspection uncovered that assembly appeared to be a 1-inch insulation board applied to CMU block wall with some sort of adhesive, no fasteners of any kind. And cause of failure was poor workmanship and missing defective fasteners. So this concludes our FISP presentation today.